Moving into a new house should be exciting, right? Well, for Lisa, a 34-year-old nurse and single mom, it started that way. She had saved for years to buy her first home on quiet Oakwood Drive. The house wasn't fancy, but it was hers. What really sold her on the place was the long, wide driveway that could easily fit 2 cars. As someone who worked crazy hospital shifts, being able to pull straight into her own driveway felt like a luxury. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first glance. Tree-lined streets, well-kept houses, and friendly waves from neighbors working in their gardens. Lisa felt like she had finally found the right place to raise her 8-year-old daughter Amy and start fresh after her divorce 2 years earlier. The first few days went smoothly. Lisa spent her time off unpacking boxes, setting up Amy's room, and getting familiar with the local grocery stores and Amy's new school route. Everything felt like it was falling into place. She even met a few neighbors who seemed genuinely nice and welcomed her to the street with homemade cookies and helpful tips about the best pizza delivery places. But then came her first late shift at the hospital. Lisa worked as a registered nurse in the emergency department, which meant her schedule was all over the place. Some days she worked mornings, others she pulled the dreaded night shift that didn't end until 7 in the morning. That particular Thursday, she had worked a 12-hour day shift that left her completely drained. All she wanted was to get home, check on Amy, who was at her grandmother's house, and collapse into bed. As she turned onto Oakwood Drive at nearly 9 at night, Lisa noticed something odd. There was a car parked in her driveway, not just partially blocking it, but fully parked there like it belonged. She slowed down, thinking maybe she was confused about which house was hers. But no, there was her house number, and there was definitely someone else's car sitting in her spot. Lisa parked on the street and walked up to get a better look. It was a silver SUV that she didn't recognize. No note on the windshield, no emergency flashers, nothing to suggest this was some kind of temporary situation. She looked around, wondering if maybe one of her new neighbors was having some kind of issue and needed to use her driveway for a legitimate reason. That's when she noticed the house directly across the street. The front yard was full of cars, and she could hear laughter and music coming from inside. It looked like someone was having a party. The pieces started to come together, but Lisa couldn't quite believe what she was thinking. She decided to give the situation the benefit of the doubt. Maybe whoever owned the SUV didn't realize they were blocking someone's driveway. Maybe they thought the house was still empty since she had just moved in. Lisa walked across the street and knocked on the door where the party seemed to be happening. A woman in her mid-40s answered the door. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and was wearing the kind of outfit that screamed, "I have money and I want everyone to know it." Her smile was bright but somehow didn't reach her eyes. "Hi there," Lisa said politely. "I'm your new neighbor from across the street. I think someone from your party might have accidentally parked in my driveway." "The silver SUV?" The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Oh, that's mine," she said casually, like she was talking about the weather. "I'm Karen, by the way. Welcome to the neighborhood." Lisa waited for Karen to say she would move the car, but instead Karen just stood there looking at her expectantly. "Could you please move it?" Lisa finally asked. "I just got off a really long shift and I'd like to park in my own driveway." Karen laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. "Listen, sweetie, the people who lived there before never minded when I used their driveway during my get-togethers. It's not like you're using it right now anyway. You're parked on the street just fine." Lisa felt her exhaustion being replaced by disbelief. "But it's my driveway. I just bought the house." "Look," Karen said, her voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. "We're all neighbors here. Sometimes we need to share spaces. The Johnsons who lived there before understood that. Maybe you'll understand it too once you've been here a little longer." With that, Karen started to close the door. Lisa put her hand up to stop it. "Wait, I'm not asking for a favor here. I'm asking you to move your car out of my driveway. It's my property." Karen's fake smile faded completely. "Honey, you need to learn how things work around here. People help each other out. Don't be one of those difficult neighbors who makes a big deal out of everything." And then she actually closed the door in Lisa's face. Lisa stood there for a moment, wondering if she was dreaming. Did that really just happen? Did her neighbor actually refuse to move her car from Lisa's driveway, and then lecture her about being difficult? She walked back to the SUV and looked at it more carefully. It was parked perfectly in the center of her driveway, clearly not an accident or oversight. This was intentional. Karen had deliberately chosen to park in Lisa's driveway, instead of figuring out parking for her party guests like a normal person would. Lisa pulled out her phone and took a few pictures of the SUV in her driveway, though she wasn't sure why. She just felt like she needed some kind of documentation of this crazy situation. She ended up having to park on the street that night, which meant carrying her work bag, purse, and a bag of groceries she had picked up during her break all the way from 3 houses down. By the time she got inside, she was even more exhausted and now completely frustrated. Lisa tried to put the incident out of her mind. Maybe Karen was just having an off night. Maybe the party atmosphere had made her act differently than she normally would. People make mistakes, right? But as she was getting ready for bed, she looked out her bedroom window and saw that Karen's party was winding down. People were leaving, getting into their cars and driving away. But the silver SUV stayed right where it was in Lisa's driveway. It wasn't until almost 11:30 that night that Lisa heard a car door slam and an engine start. She looked out to see Karen finally moving her SUV out of the driveway and back to her own house across the street. Lisa fell asleep that night hoping this was just a one-time thing. A weird welcome to the neighborhood that wouldn't happen again. After all, she had made it clear that she needed to use her own driveway. Surely Karen would respect that going forward. But deep down, something told her this wasn't over. The way Karen had acted, the entitled attitude, the complete dismissal of Lisa's reasonable request, it all pointed to someone who wasn't used to being told no. And Lisa had a sinking feeling that her parking problems were just beginning. Little did she know, this was only the start of what would become a months-long battle over something as simple as the right to park in her own driveway. Lisa really hoped the driveway incident was a one-time thing. Maybe Karen had just been having a bad night, or maybe she genuinely didn't understand that the new neighbor actually wanted to use her own parking space. People can change their behavior when they realize they've made a mistake, right? Wrong. 3 days later, Lisa came home from picking up Amy from school to find the same silver SUV parked in her driveway again. This time there wasn't even a party happening across the street. Karen's house looked quiet, with just one other car in her own driveway. Lisa sat in her car on the street for a moment, staring at the SUV and trying to figure out what to do. Amy noticed her mom's frustration right away. "Why can't we park in our own driveway, Mom?" "That's a great question, sweetheart," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Let me go talk to our neighbor." She walked Amy into the house first, then headed across the street to knock on Karen's door again. This time, Karen answered wearing workout clothes and looking annoyed at being interrupted. "What now?" Karen asked before Lisa could even speak. "Your car is in my driveway again," Lisa said, trying to stay polite but firm. Karen rolled her eyes. "I had a friend over for lunch and we needed the space. She just left. I'll move it when I'm done with my workout." "When will that be?" Lisa asked. "When I'm finished," Karen snapped. "Look, I don't know what your problem is, but you're being really uptight about this. It's just a driveway." Lisa felt her patience wearing thin. "It's my driveway. I bought this house specifically because it had good parking. Well, the Johnsons never cared. Maybe you should try to be more like them." This time, Lisa didn't wait for Karen to close the door on her. She turned and walked away, her hands shaking with frustration. When she got back to her house, she called her sister to vent about the situation. She said, "What?" Her sister Rachel asked in disbelief. "Lisa, that's insane. You need to call the police." "And tell them what? My neighbor is parking in my driveway?" "It sounds so petty when I say it out loud." "It's not petty, it's your property. Look up the non-emergency number and ask them what your options are." Lisa did call the police non-emergency line that evening, after Karen finally moved her car around dinner time. The officer who answered was polite but not very encouraging. "Technically, yes, it's trespassing," he explained. "But for something like this, we'd recommend trying to work it out with your neighbor first. If it becomes a pattern or if there's any threatening behavior, then we can get involved." A pattern. Well, Lisa was pretty sure she was seeing the beginning of one. For the next 2 weeks, Karen's car appeared in Lisa's driveway 4 more times. Once when Karen was having her book club over. Once when she was getting her house painted and needed to move her car out of the way. Once when she claimed her garage door was broken. And once when Lisa couldn't figure out any reason at all. Karen's house looked completely normal, with no guests or workers or emergencies in sight. Each time, Lisa had to either park on the street or knock on Karen's door to ask her to move. and each time Karen acted like Lisa was being unreasonable for wanting to use her own driveway. "You know, most people would be happy to help out a neighbor," Karen said during one of these conversations, "but I guess you're not most people." The comment stung because Lisa considered herself a helpful person. She had always gotten along well with neighbors in the past. She volunteered at Amy's school. She helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and she had even offered to help Karen when she first moved in. But apparently, not letting someone take over your driveway made you a bad neighbor in Karen's world. The situation got worse when Karen started leaving notes on Lisa's windshield when she parked on the street. The first note said, "Hope you can learn to share better in the future." The second one said, "The Johnsons were so much friendlier." Lisa started taking pictures of every incident. The car in her driveway, the notes on her windshield, even screenshots of the dates and times. She wasn't sure what she was going to do with the evidence, but something told her she might need it later. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night in October. Lisa had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift in the emergency room. They had been short-staffed, she hadn't gotten a proper break, and she was physically and emotionally drained. All she wanted was to get home, hug Amy, and fall into bed. When she turned onto Oakwood Drive, she immediately saw Karen's SUV in her driveway. But this time it wasn't just parked there. It was parked in a way that completely blocked access to Lisa's garage. Even if Lisa wanted to park behind it in her own driveway, she couldn't, and there was a note tucked under the windshield wiper. Lisa parked on the street and walked over to read the note, rain soaking through her scrubs. It said, "Emergency at my house, we'll move later. Thanks for understanding. Your neighbor, Karen." Lisa looked across the street at Karen's house. Every light was on, and she could see people moving around inside. She could hear laughter and music. This wasn't an emergency, it was another party. Something inside Lisa snapped. She had been patient. She had been polite. She had tried to be understanding. But this was too much. She was exhausted, it was raining, and she was being forced to park 3 blocks away because all the nearby street spots were taken. She marched across the street and pounded on Karen's door harder than she had before. Karen answered with a wine glass in her hand and an annoyed expression on her face. "Oh, it's you again." "There's no emergency," Lisa said, her voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. "You're having a party. Move your car right now." "Listen here," Karen said, stepping closer to the door. "I don't appreciate your tone. I told you it was an emergency." "What emergency?" Lisa demanded. "I can see people laughing and drinking wine in your living room. That's none of your business. And frankly, I don't think you understand how neighborhoods work. People help each other out. People share. People don't make a huge fuss over a stupid parking space." "It's not a parking space, it's my driveway," Lisa shouted louder than she had intended. The party noise inside Karen's house got quieter, and Lisa realized people were probably listening to their argument. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Keep your voice down. You're embarrassing yourself." "Move your car," Lisa said through gritted teeth. "When I'm ready," Karen replied, and started to close the door again. This time, Lisa put her whole hand against the door to stop it. "No, right now. I'm calling the police if you don't move it right now." Karen looked shocked that Lisa was actually standing up to her. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Fine," Karen finally said, "but this conversation isn't over. You're going to learn that this neighborhood has certain ways of doing things." 20 minutes later, Karen finally came out and moved her car, but not before making a big show of apologizing loudly to her party guests for having to interrupt their fun because of her difficult neighbor. Lisa finally got to park in her own driveway after 10 p.m., but she was too upset to feel relieved. As she sat in her car, still in her wet scrubs, she realized that this problem wasn't going to go away on its own. Karen wasn't going to suddenly become reasonable or respectful. She needed a real solution, and she was going to find one. After the rainy night confrontation, Lisa knew she had to stop hoping that Karen would suddenly develop respect for other people's property. It was time to take action, but she wanted to make sure she did everything the right way. The last thing she needed was to escalate the situation and end up on the wrong side of the law herself. The next morning, Lisa dropped Amy off at school and headed straight to the city planning office. She had done some quick internet research the night before, but she wanted to get official confirmation about her property lines and rights. The clerk at the planning office was incredibly helpful. She pulled up the official property survey for Lisa's house and showed her exactly where her land began and ended. The driveway was completely 100% on Lisa's property. There was no gray area, no shared space, no community access agreement. It was hers, legally and clearly. So someone parking there without my permission is definitely trespassing? Lisa asked. Absolutely, the clerk confirmed. You have every right to control who uses your driveway. Some people put up gates, some put up signs. Some just call the police when someone parks there without permission. Gates. Lisa hadn't really considered that option before, but now she was intrigued. What kind of permits would I need to install a gate? She asked. The clerk explained that for a simple driveway gate on private property, she wouldn't need any special permits as long as the gate didn't extend beyond her property line or block any public walkways. It was surprisingly straightforward. Armed with this information, Lisa spent her lunch break that day calling local contractors and security companies to get estimates for installing a driveway gate. She explained her situation to each company, and most of them seemed familiar with this type of problem. Oh, you've got one of those neighbors, said Mike from Secure Home Solutions. Yeah, we install a lot of gates for exactly this reason. People think they can just use someone else's driveway whenever they want to. Mike came out to Lisa's house that weekend to give her a quote. He was a friendly guy in his 50s who had been installing security gates for 20 years. He walked around Lisa's driveway measuring and taking notes. This would be a pretty easy install, he told her. The driveway is the perfect width and we can put the gate right at the property line. I'd recommend a nice sliding gate that you can operate with a remote control. Looks professional, works smoothly, and definitely gets the message across. The quote was higher than Lisa had hoped, but not impossible. She had some money saved up from her divorce settlement that she had been planning to use for home improvements anyway, and really, what was more important than being able to use her own driveway? While Mike was there, Karen came outside to water her flowers. Lisa could feel her neighbor watching them, obviously curious about what was going on. When Mike left, Karen walked across the street. Getting some work done on the house? She asked in a fake friendly voice. Something like that, Lisa replied, not wanting to tip her hand yet. Well, I hope it's not something that's going to be an eyesore for the neighborhood. We like to keep things looking nice around here. Lisa just smiled and went back inside, but she could feel Karen's eyes on her as she closed the door. Over the next few days, Lisa did more research. She looked up local laws about property rights, trespassing, and neighbor disputes. She read online forums where other people shared similar stories about entitled neighbors who felt like they owned everyone else's property. One forum post really stuck with her. A woman in Texas had dealt with a nearly identical situation, and she had installed a gate that completely solved the problem. Best investment I ever made, the woman had written. My neighbor tried to argue that I was being antisocial. But funny how she never tried to park in my driveway again after that gate went up. Lisa also talked to some of her other neighbors to get a feel for the situation. She discovered that Karen had a bit of a reputation on Oakwood Drive. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, was very sympathetic when Lisa explained what was happening. Oh, honey, Karen has always been like that, Mrs. Patterson said while they were both getting their mail. When she first moved here 5 years ago, she tried to tell me that my rose bushes were too close to the property line and were lowering her home value. Then she wanted me to trim my oak tree because some of the branches hung over her yard. The woman thinks she owns the whole street. Has she ever parked in your driveway? Lisa asked. Oh no, dear. I have a very short driveway and my car is always there. But I've seen her park in the Johnsons' driveway plenty of times over the years. I always wondered why they put up with it. Lisa learned that the Johnsons had been an elderly couple who had lived in her house for 30 years before moving to a retirement community. According to Mrs. Patterson, they had been very passive people who avoided conflict at all costs. Karen probably took advantage of that, Mrs. Patterson said. But you're not the Johnsons and you shouldn't have to put up with her nonsense. Another neighbor, a guy named Dave who lived at the end of the street, had his own Karen story. She called the city on me last year, he told Lisa when she ran into him at the grocery store. Said my lawn was too long and was bringing down property values. The city guy came out, looked at my perfectly normal grass and told me Karen calls about something every few months. They basically ignore her now. These conversations made Lisa feel better about her planned solution. It wasn't just her being oversensitive or antisocial. Karen really was a problem, and Lisa had every right to protect her property. Lisa also called her insurance company to make sure a driveway gate wouldn't affect her homeowner's policy. The agent assured her that security improvements were generally viewed positively and might even qualify her for a small discount. The more research Lisa did, the more confident she became that a gate was the right solution. It was legal, it was permanent, and it would solve the problem without requiring her to have any more confrontations with Karen. She called Mike back and scheduled the installation for the following week. She also decided to add a security camera system that would cover her driveway and front yard. If Karen tried to cause any trouble after the gate went up, Lisa wanted video evidence. The night before the installation was scheduled to begin, Lisa sat down with Amy to explain what was happening. "Remember how our neighbor has been parking in our driveway?" she asked. "The mean lady across the street?" Amy said. Lisa tried not to smile at her daughter's blunt assessment. "Well, we're going to put up a gate so that only we can use our driveway." "Like the gates at the zoo?" Amy asked excitedly. "Sort of, but smaller. And it will open with a remote control like a garage door." Amy thought this sounded very cool, which made Lisa feel even better about her decision. That night, Lisa looked out her bedroom window at her empty driveway and smiled. In less than 24 hours, she would never have to worry about Karen's silver SUV sitting there again. She would never have to have another awkward confrontation about her own parking space. She would never have to park on the street in the rain after a long shift at work. It had taken her weeks of research and planning, but she had found the perfect solution: legal, permanent, and foolproof. She couldn't wait to see the look on Karen's face when she realized her free parking days were over. Monday morning arrived with perfect weather for construction work. Lisa had taken the day off from the hospital, partly to supervise the gate installation and partly because she was too excited to focus on anything else. She had been planning this moment for weeks, and now it was finally happening. Mike and his crew from Secure Home Solutions arrived right on time at 8 in the morning. They had a truck full of equipment and what looked like the pieces of Lisa's new gate system. Mike introduced her to his two helpers, Tony and James, who had apparently installed hundreds of these systems over the years. "All right, let's get you set up with some real peace of mind," Mike said cheerfully as he unloaded their tools. The first step was marking exactly where the gate would go. Mike used the property survey Lisa had gotten from the city planning office to make sure they placed the gate right at the property line. This was important. The gate needed to be clearly on Lisa's property so there could be no arguments about it later. While Mike was measuring and marking, Lisa noticed Karen's bedroom curtains moving across the street. Her neighbor was definitely watching the proceedings with interest. Around 9:30, Karen came outside in her robe to get her newspaper, taking an unusually long time to walk to her mailbox and back. "Looks like you've got an audience," Tony commented quietly to Lisa. "That's exactly the neighbor I'm installing this gate for," Lisa replied. Tony grinned. "Oh, this is going to be good then." The installation process was more involved than Lisa had expected. First, the crew had to dig holes for the gate posts and pour concrete footings. Then they had to run electrical wiring for the motor system that would open and close the gate automatically. The whole thing required careful planning and precise measurements. Around lunchtime, Karen finally came over to investigate directly. "Hi there," she said to Mike in her fake, friendly voice. "I'm the neighbor from across the street. What kind of project are you working on here?" "Installing a security gate for the driveway," Mike replied matter-of-factly, not looking up from his work. "A security gate?" Karen's voice went up a little. "That seems a bit extreme for this neighborhood, don't you think?" Mike shrugged. "Property owner requested it. Pretty standard installation." Karen turned to Lisa, who was sitting on her front steps watching the work. "Lisa, honey, don't you think a gate is a little antisocial? This has always been such a friendly, open neighborhood." Lisa had been preparing for this conversation. "I just want to make sure I can always park in my own driveway," she said calmly. "But we've never had any real problems," Karen protested. "Just minor neighborly things that we've worked out." "We have different definitions of working things out," Lisa replied. Karen's fake smile started to slip. "You know, gates like this can really hurt property values. People don't like feeling like they're living in some kind of fortress neighborhood. I think most people understand wanting to control access to your own property," Lisa said. At this point, Mike looked up from his work. He had clearly dealt with situations like this before. "Ma'am," he said to Karen politely but firmly, "this gate is being installed entirely on private property with all proper documentation. The homeowner has every right to control access to her driveway." Karen huffed and walked back to her house, but Lisa could see her peeking out the windows regularly for the rest of the day. The gate itself was actually quite attractive. Lisa had chosen a simple black metal design that looked professional without being too imposing. It wasn't a huge fortress wall, just a clean, sliding gate that clearly marked the boundary between public and private space. By late afternoon, the physical installation was complete. The gate looked great, and Lisa was impressed with how seamlessly it fit into her property's appearance. But the real test would be the electronic components. Mike spent an hour programming the remote control system and teaching Lisa how to use it. She got a handheld remote for her car, and they also set up a smartphone app that would let her operate the gate from anywhere. "The system has a backup battery in case of power outages," Mike explained, "and there's a manual override if you ever need it. You can also program temporary codes for guests or delivery drivers." They tested the gate multiple times to make sure everything worked smoothly. Lisa felt a thrill of satisfaction every time she pressed the remote and watched the gate slide open or closed. It was like having a magic button that protected her property. The crew also installed the security camera system Lisa had requested. 2 cameras covered the driveway and front yard area, and they connected to an app on her phone so she could monitor her property, even when she wasn't home. "If anyone tries to mess with your gate or damage your property, you'll have video evidence," James explained as he showed her how the camera system worked. By 6 o'clock, the installation was complete. Lisa walked around inspecting everything with Mike, and she was thrilled with the results. The gate looked professional and attractive. The electronic system worked perfectly, and the cameras provided excellent coverage of her driveway area. "One more thing," Mike said as he packed up his tools. "You'll want to put up a sign about private property and no unauthorized parking. It's not legally required, but it makes your intentions crystal clear." He handed her a small but official-looking sign that read, "Private property, no unauthorized parking, violators. Will be towed." Lisa had him mount it right next to the gate where it would be impossible to miss. After the crew left, Lisa stood in her driveway admiring her new gate. Amy came running out of the house where she had been doing homework during the installation. "Mom, can I try the remote?" she asked excitedly. Lisa handed her the remote and watched as Amy carefully pressed the button to open and close the gate. Her daughter was clearly as thrilled with the new addition as Lisa was. "This is so cool," Amy said. "Now only we can park in our driveway." "That's exactly right, sweetheart." As they were playing with the remote, Lisa noticed Karen come outside again. This time she walked right up to the edge of Lisa's property line and stood there staring at the gate. "Pretty impressive, isn't it?" Lisa called out cheerfully. Karen didn't respond right away. She just stood there looking at the gate like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "You really did it," she finally said. "I really did," Lisa confirmed. "This is going to make the neighborhood look terrible," Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "I think it looks great," Lisa replied. "Very professional." Karen walked back to her house without saying anything else, but Lisa could tell she was upset. For the first time since this whole situation started, Karen seemed to realize that she wasn't going to get her way. That evening, Lisa parked both her car and Amy's bike inside the driveway and closed the gate behind them. The sense of security and satisfaction was incredible. After weeks of stress and confrontation, she finally felt like she had control over her own property again. She tested the remote one more time before bed, just because she could. Tomorrow would be the real test. The first time Karen would encounter the gate when she tried to park in Lisa's driveway. Lisa could hardly wait. The moment Lisa had been waiting for came sooner than expected. She thought it might take a few days or even a week before Karen tried to park in her driveway again. But apparently old habits die hard. It was Friday evening, just 4 days after the gate installation. Lisa was in her kitchen making dinner when she heard a car pull up outside. She glanced out the window and saw Karen's silver SUV turning into her driveway, just like she had done dozens of times before. But this time was different. Lisa watched as Karen drove up to the gate and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Karen just sat there in her car, probably processing what she was seeing. The gate was closed, The private property sign was clearly visible, and there was obviously no way to get past the barrier. Lisa could see Karen leaning forward in her driver's seat, as if getting a closer look would somehow make the gate disappear. Then Karen put her car in park and got out to examine the gate more closely. Standing at her kitchen window, Lisa had a perfect view of the whole scene. Karen walked up to the gate and actually tried to push it open with her hands, as if it might just slide aside if she applied enough force. When that didn't work, she looked around like she was searching for some kind of hidden button or secret entrance. Amy came into the kitchen and noticed her mom watching out the window. "What's happening, Mom?" she asked. "Karen just discovered our gate," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice neutral even though she was feeling a surge of satisfaction. Amy climbed up on a chair to look out the window too. "She looks confused," she observed. That was putting it mildly. Karen looked completely bewildered. She walked back and forth along the gate, checking every inch of it. She tried pushing different sections, obviously hoping to find some weak spot or way around the barrier. Then Karen did something that surprised even Lisa. She pulled out her phone and seemed to be taking pictures of the gate. Lisa couldn't figure out what that was about, but she made a mental note to check her security camera footage later. After about 5 minutes of standing there examining the gate, Karen finally seemed to accept that it was real and wasn't going away. She got back in her SUV and backed out of Lisa's driveway. But instead of driving away, Karen parked on the street right in front of Lisa's house and got out again. This time she marched straight up to Lisa's front door and knocked loudly. Lisa took a deep breath and went to answer it. When she opened the door, Karen was standing there with her hands on her hips and a look of indignation on her face. "What is this?" Karen demanded, pointing at the gate. "It's a security gate," Lisa replied calmly. "For my driveway. You can't just put up a gate without warning people." "I don't need to warn anyone about improvements I make to my own property," Lisa said. "This is ridiculous." Karen's voice was getting louder. "What am I supposed to do when I have guests over?" "Park in your own driveway," Lisa suggested. "Or on the street." "My driveway isn't big enough for multiple cars." "That sounds like a problem you'll need to solve." Karen stared at Lisa like she had grown a second head. "Are you seriously going to be this petty about a parking space?" "It's not a parking space, it's my driveway. And I'm not being petty, I'm protecting my property." "The Johnsons never acted like this," Karen said, falling back on her favorite argument. "I'm not the Johnsons," Lisa replied simply. For a moment, Karen seemed genuinely speechless. She opened and closed her mouth a few times like she was trying to think of what to say next, but no words came out. Lisa had never seen Karen at a loss for words before. In every previous encounter, Karen had been confident, entitled, and full of excuses for why she should be able to do whatever she wanted. But now, faced with a physical barrier that couldn't be argued with or dismissed, she seemed completely thrown off balance. This is, Karen stammered. "Legal," Lisa finished for her. "It's legal, it's on my property, and it's staying." "You're going to ruin the neighborhood," Karen finally managed to say. "I'm going to protect my property," Lisa corrected. Karen turned and looked back at the gate, then at Lisa, then at the gate again. She seemed to be having trouble accepting the reality of the situation. "What if there's an emergency?" she asked, grasping for any argument that might work. "Then you can call 911 like everyone else. They don't need to use my driveway for emergencies." "What if I need to turn around in your driveway?" "Use someone else's driveway. Or find a different place to turn around." "What if—" "Karen," Lisa interrupted gently but firmly, "there is no scenario where you need to use my driveway. You've been getting along fine without it for years before I moved here. You'll get along fine without it now." The truth of this statement seemed to hit Karen hard. She had been acting like Lisa's driveway was essential to her daily life. But of course it wasn't. She had managed just fine before the Johnsons started letting her use it, and she could manage fine now. Karen stood there for another long moment, clearly struggling to come up with any response. Lisa could see the wheels turning in her head as she realized that all of her usual arguments and manipulations weren't going to work here. "Fine," Karen finally said. But her voice was much quieter than usual. "But don't expect me to be friendly anymore." "I never expected you to be friendly," Lisa replied honestly. "I just expected you to respect my property." Karen turned and walked back to her car without saying another word. Lisa watched as she got in and drove away, probably to find street parking for whatever gathering she had planned. Over the next few weeks, Lisa got to witness Karen's gradual acceptance of the new reality. The first few times Karen had guests over, Lisa could see her across the street gesturing angrily at the gate and clearly complaining about it to anyone who would listen. But after a while, Karen seemed to run out of steam. She stopped glaring at the gate every time she walked past. She stopped making comments about it to other neighbors. She even started parking more strategically in her own driveway to make room for guest cars. The gate worked exactly as Lisa had hoped it would. She never again had to worry about coming home to find someone else's car in her driveway. She never again had to have awkward confrontations about her own parking space. She never again had to park on the street in the rain after a long shift at work. More importantly, the gate sent a clear message to Karen and anyone else who might be watching. Lisa was not someone who could be pushed around or taken advantage of. She was willing to stand up for herself and protect what was hers. 6 months later, when Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Karen had been complaining about Lisa to other neighbors, Lisa wasn't bothered at all. "What does she say about me?" Lisa asked out of curiosity. "Oh, she calls you antisocial and says you ruined the friendly atmosphere of the neighborhood," Mrs. Patterson reported. "But honestly, dear, I think most of us are just impressed that someone finally stood up to her." Lisa smiled. Sometimes the best way to deal with an entitled neighbor isn't to keep trying to reason with them or hope they'll change. Sometimes you just have to build a gate and let them figure out how to live with the consequences of their own behavior. And sometimes, watching them stand speechless in front of that gate is worth every penny you spent on it.